The day started like any other, sunlight filtering through the tall oaks in my backyard, birds chirping, and a soft breeze rustling the leaves. My name's Sam, and I'm the kind of person who appreciates the quiet. After years of working with wildlife rescue, I found solace in my home, a secluded piece of land tucked away from the chaos of city life. It was here that I had built not just a house, but a sanctuary for a pack of rescue wolves I'd cared for over the years. I'd always dreamed of having land to care for animals that needed a second chance. So, when I bought this house on the outskirts of town, I didn't just build a fence to mark the perimeter. I built a fortress, a strong cedarwood fence that stood as a barrier between my animals and the outside world. The wolves needed it. Without it, they'd be vulnerable to the dangers of the wild and, worse, the misunderstandings of people who didn't respect their space. This fence was more than a boundary. It was a promise. But promises have a way of being broken, and this one was about to be shattered. I first saw Karen a month ago. She had recently moved into the neighborhood, and as I heard through the grapevine, she was the new HOA president. At first, I thought nothing of it. People like her came and went all the time, those who loved to talk about rules and regulations, but rarely left an impression. But Karen wasn't like the others. She had an air about her, a self-righteous certainty that this neighborhood would bend to her will. It wasn't long before I started receiving complaints from the HOA. My fence, they claimed, was unsightly and didn't meet community standards. They pointed to the height, the roughness of the cedarwood, and how it clashed with the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I had heard the whispers, of course. People often had an issue with anything that stood out in this pristine, cookie-cutter community. But this was different. The HOA was no longer just an annoyance. They were demanding change. I tried to ignore it at first, but Karen was persistent. One afternoon, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, there she stood, clipboard in hand, wearing a blazer that screamed authority, her eyes scanning me like I was a child who had broken the rules. "I'm Karen," she said without a smile, "and you are in violation of HOA regulations." I leaned against the doorframe, trying to keep my cool. "I don't see a problem. The fence is perfectly within the guidelines." She raised an eyebrow. "Not in my opinion. It's too high, too rustic. It detracts from the beauty of the neighborhood." She glanced at her clipboard, as if consulting some rulebook. "You'll need to remove it. We can't allow such an eyesore to stand." "Karen, I've explained before. It's there for a reason. My wolves need it." But Karen wasn't listening. "The HOA has made its decision. If you don't remove the fence, there will be fines. And believe me, Sam, we can make things difficult for you." The conversation ended there, but the message was clear. Karen's vision for the neighborhood didn't include someone like me or my wolves. That night, I stood by the window, staring out at the fence. I had built it with my own hands, and it had stood for years. It wasn't just a structure. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for. And now, some woman with a clipboard and an inflated sense of power was threatening to tear it all down. I wasn't the type to give up easily, especially when it came to the well-being of my animals. I had already fought hard to give these wolves a safe place to heal, to be free of the abuse they had suffered in the past. This fence wasn't just wood. It was the last thing keeping them from the outside world, a world they had no place in. But I knew how this worked. The HOA had a history of bending rules to get what they wanted, and they rarely took no for an answer. I had two choices. I could back down and let them destroy everything I had built, or I could fight. As I stood there in the dark, my decision became clear. I wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else tear down the one thing that stood between my wolves and harm. The fence was staying up no matter what. The next morning, I sent a letter to the HOA, laying out the facts about my property and the necessity of the fence. I wasn't just going to roll over, I was going to stand my ground. The HOA, however, wasn't known for its leniency. They would respond with their usual blend of bureaucracy and threats. But I was ready. The battle was just beginning, and Karen had no idea what she was up against. The days passed in a tense silence, as if the neighborhood itself knew a storm was brewing. I spent my time reinforcing the fence and taking care of the wolves. Maverick, the alpha, watched me from his enclosure, his amber eyes as sharp and knowing as always. Luna, the silver wolf, played with the younger ones, and Talon, the scarred survivor, lay on the grass, his gaze constantly scanning the surroundings. The wolves felt the tension, too. They were creatures of instinct, and even though they couldn't understand the specifics, they could sense something was off. Then it happened. One morning, as I stepped out to grab the newspaper, I noticed a strange vehicle parked on the curb. A large, unmarked truck with a heavy-duty trailer hitched to it. My stomach tightened. I knew exactly what it was. HOA enforcers sent to remedy the situation. I walked toward the truck, trying to steady my breathing. As I reached the front gate, I spotted Karen standing with a group of men, construction workers, tools in hand. She didn't even look surprised to see me. "Good morning, Sam," she said, her voice sweet but dripping with false politeness. "We've come to take care of that fence. It's not up to code, and you've had more than enough time to comply." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "You can't just tear it down. This fence isn't some decoration. It's a necessity. For the wolves." Karen's eyes flickered with impatience. "We've already had this conversation. The HOA doesn't make exceptions. The fence is coming down, whether you like it or not." Before I could respond, the workers were already unloading equipment. They were moving with precision, their eyes on the task ahead, as though they had no clue about the lives they were about to affect. But I knew that once that fence came down, my wolves would be exposed. Vulnerable. And Karen didn't care. "Stop," I yelled, stepping forward. "You don't get it. These wolves aren't pets. They're not some backyard animals. If you take that fence down, you're putting them and everyone else at risk." Karen sighed, looking over at the men. "Just get it done," she ordered, brushing me off with a wave of her hand. The HOA's decision is final. A surge of anger bubbled inside me, but I knew there was nothing I could do to stop them. They had the power of the HOA behind them. I wasn't about to get into a physical confrontation, but that didn't mean I wouldn't fight back. I turned and walked back to the house, but not without giving one last look at the workers. As I reached the porch, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number for a lawyer I knew, someone who could advise me on my rights. But before I could finish the call, I heard the unmistakable sound of power tools whirring to life. The fence was coming down, piece by piece. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I had built that fence with my own hands. I had put so much of myself into that project, knowing it was the only thing keeping my wolves safe. And now, it was being destroyed by a group of strangers who had no idea what they were doing. The noise of the tools was deafening. The workers ripped into the wood, splintering the cedar like it was nothing. My heart sank with each gust of the saw. Maverick howled from his enclosure, as if he could sense what was happening. It was a primal cry, a warning, and I couldn't ignore it. I rushed to the back door and stepped outside, looking toward the wolves' enclosures. They were on edge. Talon was pacing, his eyes fixed on the scene. Luna stood by the fence, ears twitching. They knew something was wrong. And that's when I realized it wasn't just the fence they were missing, it was the safety, the security that the fence had provided them. They could feel it, too. They could feel the instability that had suddenly entered their world. "Stop. You have no idea what you're doing," I shouted at the workers, but they kept going, methodical in their task. It was as though I didn't even exist. I felt powerless, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Just then, I heard a voice from behind me. It was Karen, smiling smugly as she watched the destruction unfold. "You should have listened, Sam. We gave you plenty of time to comply." I turned slowly, my eyes narrowing. "This isn't over, Karen. You don't know who you're messing with." But she simply shrugged, as if dismissing me entirely. "Oh, I think I do." In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just a fight for a fence. It was a fight for everything I had built, everything I had worked for. And as the workers tore down the final panel, I swore to myself that I wouldn't let them get away with it. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Karen win. As the last remnants of the fence lay in a pile of splintered wood, I could hear the wolves growling softly behind me. They were unsettled, but not broken. Not yet. The silence after the workers left was suffocating. The fence, once a sturdy protector of my sanctuary, was reduced to a pile of rubble. A deep sense of violation weighed heavily in the air. My wolves, unsettled and uneasy, paced their enclosures, their eyes scanning the yard with a new wariness. The sense of security they once had was gone, and they could feel the shift in the environment. I stood there, staring at the empty space where the fence had stood. The area now felt exposed, vulnerable. I couldn't believe what had just happened. They hadn't just torn down a fence, they had shattered everything I'd worked for. My sanctuary was no longer safe. My wolves had no barrier between them and the outside world. No boundary between them and danger. I clenched my fists, a storm of rage brewing inside me. How could Karen have done this? How could she tear down something that wasn't just a fence, but a lifeline for my animals? I had tried to reason with her, but she hadn't cared. All she saw was a rule that needed to be enforced, a vision of uniformity that didn't allow for nuance or exception. I walked to the edge of the property, my mind racing. I needed a plan. Something more than just a letter or a phone call. This fight was personal now. I turned to see the pack gathered in the corner of the yard, their eyes fixed on me as if waiting for direction. Maverick, the alpha, stood tall and proud, his head held high. He was a wolf of few words, but in his eyes, I saw an understanding. He knew this was a battle we had to win. Luna, the silver wolf, watched me closely, her sharp eyes scanning the area as if searching for threats. Talon's scarred face softened slightly as I approached, but his body language spoke volumes. The wolves were ready. I leaned against the porch railing, gathering my thoughts. There had to be a way to turn this around. Suddenly, a thought struck me. The wolves. They were my only true allies in this. They weren't just animals, they were survivors, each one having faced their own challenges and emerged stronger. And they had one thing Karen could never understand: a deep, instinctive connection to the land, to freedom, and to me. The fence wasn't just about keeping them contained. It was about their safety, their survival. Without it, they were exposed to a world that didn't care for them. But there was something more. They were also powerful, untamed creatures. And Karen, for all her self-assured authority, had underestimated them. I couldn't just fight her with words. I had to show her what she had unleashed. The more I thought about it, the more the idea took shape. There was something poetic about it. I had a pack of rescue wolves, each one capable of so much more than people realized. They weren't just animals, they were a symbol of resilience. And now they were going to be my weapon. I knew what I had to do. The next day, I began preparing. The wolves, as calm and disciplined as they were, had been trained in certain behaviors, ones that I could control with the right command. I wasn't going to set them loose on Karen or anyone else. No, that would be reckless. But I could use them to make a statement. A powerful one. I spent hours gathering supplies, preparing the wolves for what would come. Maverick was the first to come to me, standing close by, his amber eyes watching me intently. I could see the trust in those eyes. He was ready. Luna, too, was on her way, padding softly behind me, her movements graceful and controlled. Talon stayed near the edge of the property, as always, alert but not quite as involved. He was a wild card. Unpredictable, but loyal. By the time dusk fell, I was ready. I opened the gates to their enclosures and let them roam the yard freely. They were still cautious, unsure of the new territory without the familiar boundary of the fence, but they knew this land. And they knew me. Together, we would reclaim what was ours. As the wolves moved through the yard, I began the next phase of my plan, preparation for the HOA's next visit. I knew Karen wouldn't stop at just the fence. She would continue to press her rule, pushing until everything I'd built was destroyed. I had to get ahead of her, to strike before she realized what was happening. And that's when I saw the delivery truck pull up to the curb. The HOA was back, this time with reinforcements. They had no idea what was waiting for them. I stepped back into the shadows, just out of sight, and took a deep breath. It was time for Karen to face the consequences of her actions. The air was thick with tension as Karen's car pulled into the driveway. Behind her, a group of workers in neon vests stepped out of their trucks, ready to finish what they had started. They had no idea what awaited them. They had no idea that this time, they weren't just dealing with a man and his animals. They were walking into a trap. I stood still in the shadows, watching the group through the window. The wolves were scattered throughout the yard, but they weren't far from me. Maverick, ever the leader, stayed close, his eyes locked on the workers. He could sense the danger in the air, just as I could. Luna, agile and alert, moved silently among the trees, her sleek coat blending into the shadows. Talon was still near the back of the property, his scarred body tense, his ears perked. I waited, my hand on the door handle, listening to the sound of boots crunching on the gravel driveway. Karen emerged from her car, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She didn't see me yet, and I made sure she wouldn't until the time was right. "Well, Sam," Karen called out, her voice sweet but dripping with superiority, "I see you've finally decided to give up on that fence. I must say, I'm relieved. It's nice to see that you're beginning to understand the importance of community standards." I stepped out from the shadows, my voice low but firm. "You have no idea what you've done, Karen." She froze, her smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" "I tried to reason with you," I said, taking a few steps forward. "I told you that fence wasn't just about appearances. It was about the safety of my wolves. And now, you've gone and destroyed everything. You think this is just about wood and nails, but it's not. It's about trust, something you clearly don't understand." Behind me, I could hear a low growl. It wasn't Maverick, but the sound was unmistakable. A warning. "Sam, stop with the theatrics. You've lost. The fence is gone, and I'm sure the HOA will be very pleased to see the property cleaned up." Karen's tone was condescending, her gaze flicking to the workers as if expecting them to continue their task. "If you'd just listen." That's when the growl escalated into a full-fledged howl. Karen's eyes snapped toward the sound. Maverick was standing near the edge of the yard, his body poised and ready. His amber eyes locked onto Karen's, and for a moment, there was a pause, an unspoken understanding. The pack was here, and they were waiting for my signal. "Maverick, no," I muttered under my breath, but the wolf's instincts were already in motion. He stepped forward, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his fur. The workers froze, eyes wide, hands halfway to their tools. Karen looked from Maverick to me, her expression shifting from confusion to fear. "Sam," she said, voice suddenly shaking, "what are you doing?" I didn't answer. Instead, I gave a single sharp command. "Maverick, go." The alpha wolf lunged forward, his speed blurring the space between him and the workers. The men scattered, some stumbling backward in panic, while others froze in place. Maverick, ever controlled, didn't chase them. He simply stood his ground, his presence commanding respect. Luna moved with him, her silver coat a flash of movement as she silently circled the yard, her eyes never leaving the men. The tension was palpable as Karen took a step back, her face pale. You're insane. You can't." I stepped forward, my gaze steady. "I told you, Karen. This isn't just about a fence. This is about respect for the life I've built here. You made a mistake, and now you're going to face the consequences." Karen's voice wavered. "You're threatening me with your wolves? This is insane." But the wolves weren't threatening her, not really. They were simply making a statement. Maverick, Luna, and Talon weren't attacking. They were guarding. They were showing her the reality of the situation. They weren't just animals. They were a force of nature, untamable and fierce in their loyalty. They represented the last line of defense between me and the destruction of everything I had worked for. I stepped closer to Karen, my tone steady but unyielding. "You think you can come onto my property, tear down everything that means something to me, and walk away without consequences? You're wrong." Karen swallowed hard, her body shaking as she looked between the wolves and me. I didn't know. I didn't realize. You never stopped to understand," I said quietly. Now you do. I turned to the workers, still cowering at the edge of the yard. Get in your trucks.
Leave. Now.
Without a word, they scrambled to obey, climbing into their vehicles and speeding off down the driveway. Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, watching as her control over the situation slipped away. The wolves slowly relaxed, their bodies no longer coiled with tension, but their eyes never left her. They were watching, waiting. Karen took one last glance at the pack, her face red with frustration and humiliation. She opened her mouth to speak, but then seemed to think better of it. Without another word, she turned and walked briskly to her car, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. I watched as her car disappeared down the road, my wolves silently returning to their spots, their movements graceful and serene. It was over. Karen had learned the hard way that you can't always control the world around you with rules and threats. Sometimes, nature had a way of reminding you who truly held power. I looked at my pack, feeling the weight of their loyalty and strength. We had won this fight, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the last battle we would face. And I would always be ready.